Hi students, welcome to the session 2 of transport of substances in animals and plants. In the previous session, we discussed about the introduction to transport of substances, in which we discussed that food, oxygen, water and minerals and waste products are the important inevitable substances which needs to be transported in the body. We also discussed about transport in animals and in humans, in which we discussed about the fluid, that is blood. So, in today's session, we'll continue the topic of blood and we will study about blood vessels. So let us start with today's interesting session and learn about blood vessels. Yes, students. Blood flows through our body in a complex system of tubes called blood vessels. So, there are mainly 3 types of blood vessels: arteries, capillaries, and veins. Students, the circulatory system, our circulatory system is basically made up of the heart and interconnection of blood vessels and blood. The vessels start out large near the heart and branch off and become smaller to reach areas like the tip of the nose, the fingers and toes, and the very tiny vessels within the lungs. The heart is the center of the circulatory system. The oxygenated blood flows out of the heart into the body through arteries, and these arteries become smaller and smaller until they turn into a fine capillary network that then turns into small veins and eventually becomes bigger veins until the blood is returned to the heart. The lungs are a peripheral part of the circulatory system in that they are responsible for removing carbon dioxide and attaching the oxygen to the blood that moves through the system. So, the heart is the main or the center of the circulatory system, but it cannot work without the arteries, veins and capillaries. It needs some medium. So these are the blood vessels which are inevitable part of the circulatory system. Remember that blood flows through our body in a complex system of tubes called as blood vessels. So let us now study about the blood vessels in detail. Yes. Here you can see the beautiful picture of the longitudinal section of an artery. Right? So this is a beautiful picture of the longitudinal section of an artery. Basically, arteries are always responsible for carrying blood away from the heart. Remember this. And at any given time, the arteries contain around 20% of the body's total blood supply. In general, the arteries always carry oxygenated blood into the body. Students, the human body book states that the only exception to this rule is the pulmonary artery, which carries deoxygenated blood away from the heart and into the lungs. So the main artery that comes off of the heart, responsible for carrying all of the oxygenated blood away from the heart, is called the aorta. These all terms we will study in the human heart. We'll get familiar with all these terms. Just listen carefully. So, on an average, the aorta is about 1 inch in diameter. So this is the cross section of an artery, which shows that there are several distinct layers of tissue. And the very inside of the artery is a smooth elastic tissue. The next layer is more elastic, which is made up of more muscle fibers. The outer layer is very dense, irregular, and it is also made up of an irregular tissue. So, it basically pushes the receptors that respond to signals from the brain, even though there are several layers of tissue. You will be very amazed to know that the artery walls on average are only 1/25 of an inch thick or 1 millimeter. The lining of the arteries has to have muscle to be able to withstand the contractions of the heart as well as to change the diameter as the body needs change. So as the arteries move away from the heart and into the different extremities of the body like toes or fingers, they become smaller and they are called as arterioles. So both the arteries and arterioles narrow when the heart is relaxed between beats, which are called as heartbeats, which helps pump blood along. The arterioles will keep getting smaller and narrower until they meet up the capillary network. So remember, students, that arteries and veins form very inevitable blood vessels which forms the part of the circulatory system. So this longitudinal section shows the thick valves and no valves. Remember, the section of an artery have thick walls and no valves. And in the same way, there are veins which are inevitable part of the circulatory system. So they have thin walls, and the second difference between them is that they have valves. So remember the difference between the two, right? And this can be better understood when we see the longitudinal sections of both the blood vessels, right? In the same way, besides arteries, veins are the ones which are leading away from the capillary network, and they are tiny venules that branch away from the extremities and the body and become larger veins. So veins are more flexible than arteries due to the thinner layers of tissue that make up the walls, that make up the thin walls. So students, remember that the veins also lack the elastic tissue that the arteries have. This is mostly due to the fact that the pressure in veins is lower and flows more smoothly than in arteries. Inside the longer veins in the body, like the leg veins, there are walls that are made from a single layer of tissue. So these walls prevent blood from flowing backwards in the body and pooling it. The combination of muscle contractions and valves keeps the blood moving in one direction. Therefore, a failure of these valves can lead to a number of different health conditions. So there should not be any failure of these valves. The veins from the upper body pool into one large vein, and the veins from the lower body pool into one larger vein, and both of these veins forms the part of the vein structure. So these two veins empty directly into the heart. Veins always take blood to the heart and usually carry only deoxygenated blood. The only exception to this rule is the pulmonary veins that carry oxygenated blood to the heart, which we will study in the human heart. So on an average, 75% of the blood is located within the veins, right? Now besides arteries and veins, there are capillaries too. The capillaries are the thinnest of the blood vessels and connect arteries to veins, right? So here is a beautiful diagram of capillaries, and you can see the arrow which shows the flow of blood, right? So the blue one which you are seeing here, this is the vein, right? And here you can see all these are capillary network, right? So capillaries are the thinnest of the blood vessels and connect arteries to veins. A capillary network or a capillary bed is essentially a network of tiny vessels that help connect arterioles to venules. No one capillary is ever longer than 1 millimeter, and it is usually 0.01 millimeter in diameter. And this diameter is so small that blood cells can only fit through around one at a time. And this network allows for each blood cell to release oxygen and pick up carbon dioxide and other wastes to be removed from the body. So remember that capillaries hold around 5%, approximately 5% of the body's blood supply, right? So that was all about the blood vessels. Now there is one more thing which we need to discuss, which is very important. But before that, let us study something more about the capillaries. Yes, capillaries are thin-walled blood vessels, and they form a network of extremely tiny blood vessels between arteries and veins, as we discussed. The walls of the capillaries are so thin that the diffusion of gases and the chemical substances takes place very, very easily, right? So that was all about the blood vessels. Now let us discuss about the differences between arteries and veins. So students, the first difference between arteries and veins is that arteries transport blood away from the heart. While veins, they transport blood towards the heart. The second difference between the two is that arteries carry oxygenated blood, while veins carry deoxygenated blood. Now here are some exceptions, that arteries carry oxygenated blood except in the case of pulmonary artery, while the veins carry deoxygenated blood except in the case of the pulmonary vein. The third difference between arteries and veins is that arteries have relatively more muscle tissue, while the veins have relatively less muscle tissue. Because of this more muscle tissue, arteries have thick walls, while veins with less muscle tissue have thin walls. The fourth very important point about arteries is that they transport blood under higher pressure than veins, while veins transport blood under lower pressure. So remember students, that arteries carry blood away from the heart and veins carry blood to the heart. Arteries have thick walls while veins have thin walls. Arteries are deeply placed under the skin and the blood moves under high pressure, while veins are superficially placed and blood does not move under pressure, or they transport blood under lower pressure. As we saw that there are no walls inside arteries, but there are series of valves present in the veins. And because of these series of valves which are present in the veins, they function as to prevent the blood from flowing back to the organs. So this is one speciality about veins, right? So that was all about the blood vessels and the difference between arteries and veins. We will now move to another important topic, and that is the heart, the human heart. So let us study about it. Yes, students, the human heart. Students, the heart is the body's engine room responsible for pumping life-sustaining blood via a 60,000-mile long network of vessels. The heart works ceaselessly, beating 100,000 times a day, 40 million times a year. In total, clocking up 3 billion heartbeats over an average lifetime. How amazing it is. Students, it keeps the body freshly supplied with oxygen and nutrients while clearing away harmful waste matter. You will be very amazed to know that the fetal heart evolves through several different stages inside the womb. First, resembling a fish's heart, then a frog's, which has 2 chambers, then a snake's with 3, before finally adopting the 4-chambered structure of the human heart. That is why we can say that the blood is able to flow in the blood vessels due to the pumping of 4-chambered muscular organ called heart. But it is not 4-chambered from the initial stage when we are born, but it first resembles a fish's heart, then a frog's, which has 2 chambers, then a snake's with 3 chambers, and then finally, on the completion of 8 to 9 months, it has 4-chambered. It has 4 chambers, right? So about the size of its owner's clenched fist, this organ, the heart, sits in the middle of the chest behind the breastbone and between the lungs in a moistened chamber that is protected all round by the rib cage. It is made up of a special kind of muscle known as cardiac muscle. You might have heard about this term, cardiac. Cardiac term is always related with heart. So, the heart is made up of a special kind of muscle known as cardiac muscle. Besides this, it pumps blood to all the parts of the body, and it is able to do so by the rhythmic contractions and relaxations of its muscles. So these rhythmic contractions and relaxations are known as the heartbeats. So it is basically pumping the blood to all the parts of the body, and it is made up of a special kind of muscle known as cardiac muscle that works involuntarily. Involuntarily means without ordering. Without ordering means it will work automatically. We do not have to say to our heart that let's start pumping, and it will start pumping. It's not like that. That we will say our heart to stop beating and it will stop beating. No, it's wrong. They are the voluntary actions. But heart works involuntarily. Involuntarily means automatically. So we don't have to think about it. The heart speeds up or slows down, or it slows down automatically in response to nerve signals from the brain that tell it how much the body is being exerted. Normally, the heart contracts and relaxes between 70 to 80 times per minute. each heartbeat filling the 4 chambers inside the fresh round of blood. So these cavities or these 4 chambers receive the blood, the fresh round of blood, because of this rhythmic contractions and relaxations. So basically, you have to remember this, that a normal heart beats about 60 to 80 times a minute, or it relaxes and contracts between 70 and 80 times a minute. So we can hear our heartbeat with the help of an instrument called stethoscope. Remember, students, whenever you are sick, you visit doctor, right? And he actually uses this instrument known as stethoscope. The doctor uses this because he needs to hear your heartbeat, because of which the doctor will come to know whether your heart is working normally or not. So basically, we can hear our heartbeat with the help of an instrument called a stethoscope. So students, as the heart beats and forces blood to our body, we would feel a throbbing sensation at any point where an artery comes close to the surface of our skin, such as the wrist, neck, or upper arm. And this throbbing sensation is called the pulse. So remember that there is a throbbing sensation at any point when an artery comes close to the surface of our skin, and this throbbing sensation is called the pulse. So, counting the pulse rate is a simple way to estimate how fast our heart is beating. So, the 4 chambers of the heart which can estimate how fast our heart is beating is the right auricle, the left auricle, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. So these are the 4 chambers of the heart. These chambers can be explained best with the help of a diagram. So this is a beautiful diagram of the human heart. Now we are going to discuss about it. So students, see it very properly. Here you can see something protruding out. This is aorta. And the blue one or the violet one is the pulmonary artery. Then here comes the pulmonary vein. Then here this one is the left auricle. This is the left ventricle. Now talking about this side, this is the right ventricle. In between these ventricle are the valves, and this one is the right auricle. So these are some of the very important labelings which you need to remember, right? This is again the pulmonary vein, and this is pulmonary artery, right? So we need to study about all these. Now aorta here means it actually carries blood to different parts of the body. Pulmonary artery over here, it has also some function. So we are discussing about the functions of all these labelings which we have done. So aorta carries blood to different parts of the body. Pulmonary artery takes blood to the lungs for oxygenation. whereas pulmonary vein brings back the oxygen-rich blood from the lungs and it pours into the left auricle. Then comes the left auricle, which has thinner walls, and it pumps blood into the left ventricle. So from here, it will pump the blood to this left ventricle. Afterwards comes the left ventricle. Left ventricle has thicker walls. Remember that left auricle has thinner walls while left ventricle has thicker walls. So it pumps blood to the farthest part of the body through the aorta. Whereas when we talk about this side, the right auricle and right auricle gets blood from all the parts of the body. It receives blood from all the parts of the body through veins. And this blood is pumped into the right ventricle. So here, right ventricle pumps blood into the pulmonary artery that takes the blood to the lungs for oxygenation. While, what is the function of walls? What is the role of it? Yes, walls separate each of the chambers so that there is no mixing of blood, because there are 4 chambers. So it needs to be maintained by these walls. Walls allow blood to flow only in one direction. Imagine the heart without walls. Yes, if there were no walls, then blood would have flow in 2 directions, and it would have really messed up the pumping of heart. So walls separate each of the chambers so that there is no mixing of blood, and they allow blood to flow only in one direction. Right? So students, these chambers, these cavities form 2 separate pumps on each side of the heart, which are divided by a wall of muscle. The upper chamber on each side is called the aorta or atrium, and this is connected via a sealing valve to the larger, more powerful lower chamber known as ventricle. The left ventricle pumps more forcefully, which is why a person's heartbeat is felt more on the left side of the chest. And when the heart contracts, the chambers become smaller, forcing the blood first out of the atria into the ventricles, then from each ventricle into a large blood vessel connected to the top of the heart. And these vessels are the 2 main arteries. One of them is pulmonary artery, which takes blood to the lungs to receive oxygen, and other one is the aorta, which transports freshly oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. So the vessels that bring blood to the heart are the veins, right? Remember this. And one more important point which you need to remember is that the right auricle opens into the right ventricle, and left auricle always opens into the left ventricle. Right auricle into right and left auricle into left ventricle. Also remember one more point which I would like to share with you, that an artery carries oxygenated means it is the pure form of blood. So oxygenated blood, and vein carries deoxygenated blood. But the point here is to discuss is that the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood, and pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. So this is the opposite case with the pulmonary ones. Remember that an artery carries oxygenated blood, whereas the pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood. And the vein carries deoxygenated blood, while the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood. So this is about the flow of blood, right? Remember, students, that since the heart lies at the center of the blood delivery system, it is also central to life. Blood supplies both oxygen from the lungs to the other organs and tissues and removes carbon dioxide to the lungs, where the gas is breathed out, that is carbon dioxide. Blood also distributes nourishment from the digestive system and hormones from glands. Likewise, our immune system, cells travel in the bloodstream seeking out infection, and blood takes the body's waste products to the kidneys and liver to be sorted out and trashed. So given the heart's many essential functions, it seems wise to take care of it. Yet the heart disease has risen steadily over the last century, especially in industrialized countries, largely due to the changes in the diet and lifestyle. It has become the leading cause of death for both men and women in many countries. So worldwide, about 7.2 million people die from heart disease every year. So this is one shocking thing, right? So that was all about the human heart. I hope you liked today's session, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the human heart. In the next session, we will learn about the transport in one more thing, that is in plants. So till then, keep learning, keep enjoying, have fun.